Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Abdullah Samir Show. Today, I'm joined by Eric Wells. I found out about Eric when I was looking up someone else's interview, and I found this organization which I had heard about, but never really come into contact with, which was Recovering from Religion. And what I found out really piqued my curiosity. Many people, when they leave religion behind, they sometimes are left with a gap in their lives. They're left with a hole. Now, if you talk to theists will tell you, well, they're missing God. God was the hole. They're gonna have emptiness. They're gonna have depression. They have this image, and it's something I hear a lot too, right? They're like, oh, you must be depressed now that you're an ex-Muslim, now that you left Islam, because you don't have Allah in your life. And it says in the Quran, whoever forgets Allah, you will, something to the effect of they will be miserable and Allah will forget them and this and that. So people actually think this way. People actually think that it's because of your connection with God, and that's something unique that cannot be replaced in any way. But in reality, it's much more than that. It has to do with the support structures in your life. It has to do with your family. It has to do with the connections that you have. It has to do with the way that religion gets its tendrils deep inside you, right? And that's how religion is a big part of a society. So I really do think that recovering from religion, the idea is so interesting and it's so useful, because trying to get out of that, when you lose your faith, it's really something, right? For some people, especially depending on how deep you are in it, you could be almost in a cult. Even if you're not in an actual cult, the way that you've structured your life, all of your friends are deeply religious. Everything about your life has been centered around the religion. And in some cases, it's not even your choice. It's just that you're born in a conservative society in a small town, for example. And when you're in that situation, you really don't have a choice. I mean, if you're a Mormon, for example, sometimes it could be even worse. And with Muslims, it varies. Sometimes you can be like, Islam's not a big deal in your life, and you leave Islam and nothing really happens. And in some cases, like in my case, it's like everything is centered around religion. So Eric Wells is someone that has been kind of at the front lines, speaking to people. And Eric, before we get into the whole, now that I've plugged Recovering from Religion, I actually don't want to start with that, but I want to start with you, your story. What happened to you? How did you become atheist? And then from there, let's get into how you ended up being the support director for Recovering from Religion, why it's important to you and all that. But let's start with you yourself. Yeah. Let's get into it. Like what was your upbringing like?
Well, thank you so much for letting me come on here and talking with me. I really, really appreciate it. And this is actually a topic, not necessarily me, but recovering from religion and what we do is a topic I really, really love talking about. I also like talking about myself too. Who doesn't? But I was born into a Baptist household and kind of grew up. It was something that my parents had inherited, and they just put that on their children, because what else were they going to do? And I really dove into it wholeheartedly. I went on mission trips down to Mexico. I went on trying to convert folks. I really bought into it as a kid. But at my early teens, I started to kind of doubt it a little bit, or have some questions that weren't really being satisfactorily answered. And by the time I was 16, I could no longer really square what science was showing reality was, and what the Bible was saying, and the excuses that had to be made in order to keep the Bible relevant. And then there was a second thing too that really started to bug me. For a religion, Christianity, that kind of that spoke about being one of love and charity and caring, even as a teenager, the way I saw the followers treating minority groups like LGBTQ and African Americans and immigrants, I just couldn't understand, this religion is not making people any better. But the thing was, I fell for and loved the idea of not dying, about living longer after I passed away from this earth. And so I was never really afraid of hell, but I always wanted that promise, and that promise of an afterlife, and that kept me kind of in the spiritual mindset. And so after I left Christianity, I bounced around from religion to religion, Buddhism to paganism, and none of them really offered a satisfactory answer to what reality was, but they all had this promise of an afterlife. It took several years, like it was a long process, but eventually one sort of idea, the spiritual idea or magical thinking idea after another sort of toppled and went away. But this desire, this promise for an afterlife was the very last thing that I was holding on to. Like I said, I'm deathly afraid of dying. I guess pun is kind of intended, but it took about 10 years ago, I lost a really beloved pet, and it hit me. It suddenly hit me that I would no longer see her again. Like this was it. I wouldn't see her in an afterlife. I wouldn't see all of my family and my friends that I cared about in an afterlife. So that final bit of spiritual thinking was just pulled out from underneath me, and I was left with no foundation and kind of like, what the heck is going on? The world was suddenly very much changed after that. So it was a long process, but it was actually that last thing. I couldn't have said that I was an atheist at that moment, but it was the moment where I no longer had that spiritual belief, at all.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that it was wanting to live forever, or was it more like you want to meet your loved ones again, or both, I guess?
It was kind of both of those things. I really life and the things that I was learning, enjoyed them so much, and to think of those things gone and the people that I cared about and loved gone frightened me, and I didn't want to consider that that they would actually be totally gone. I wanted them to be accessible at some point in the future.
Indeed, I feel like we haven't really evolved to want to die because we don't want to die. That makes sense, because we are fighters, right? We humans, actually all life is all about existing, right? And so I feel like religion definitely takes advantage of this like a parasite, and it uses this survival, this desire to survive, and uses it to kind of feed the whole thing as a package. Whereas all we want to do is we want to avoid, and for some people it's a fear of hell. Did you have a fear of hell at all?
Oddly enough, I never really did have a fear of hell. I didn't really get into a lot of trouble or see myself necessarily as someone who was deserving of hell. Those kinds of things just didn't frighten me. But we have a lot of people who come to us at Recovering from Religion who still, even after leaving their religion, have this fear of hell. They have nightmares. They have anxiety. It's so scary for them. And my heart just kind of goes out to them for folks who are still struggling with it after all these years.
Totally. When you said religion doesn't seem to improve the way people treat others, I've seen sometimes the opposite. I've seen it does help you treat like the poor better, because now it's a little bit different with Islam and Christianity. Islam, I feel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Islam is a little bit more transactional about it. It's like, if you do this and this good deeds, you'll get this and this in return. If you feed one poor person, you get 7 good deeds. If you read the Quran, and some of the things are like, they're not actually like good deeds, because you're not actually the good deeds for you only, because you're just doing it to get something out of it. You're not actually contributing to the benefit, to the world's the situation in the world, right? So what I wanted to say though is you do have a good point when it comes to certain specific groups, like for example, minorities. Um, Minorities, like for example, LGBT is a good example. So LGBTs do have, you know, a lot of bad treatment from religious individuals because it, like, the religion actually teaches certain things about that group. But what about, like, when you say, for example, treatment of like minorities, let's say blacks, for example, or Mexicans or foreigners? Do you not find that religion actually teaches people to treat them better?
There, I think that what you may have also experienced is in Islam. I think it's very common among religions is that the folks cherry pick what they want out of their religious doctrines, and then they kind of like pick the stuff that they want their religion to be about, and then ignore the rest. Like back in the Americas, here in the Americas, in the early 19th century, the Bible was used as a way to say, hey, slavery is okay. And the Bible, again, even in modern days, is being used to look down upon folks who are different gender orientation or sexual orientations. So I think that what I was seeing in where I grew up was a bit of a form of racism. It may not have been something that was encouraged by the religious leaders in the churches that I was in, but instead might have been a cultural thing in the city that mostly wanted to remain white and not have some of these other differently colored folks. But the thing was is that the religion didn't, or the preachers and the pastors didn't really do anything about it. They kind of kept it under the rug and didn't address it at all.
That's a good point. Actually, that's a good point, that even like the Bible has been used as justification for slavery, because there's verses in the New Testament and Old Testament talking about, you know, treat your slave like this. If your slave, I mean, I'd say the Old Testament's probably worse.
Yeah.
You know, so but in both cases, it has been used to justify those sort of that sort of bad treatment, that immoral action of slavery, because unfortunately, you know, these old ancient texts, they don't have the same moral values that we have today. And how do you think people see, even though the Bible doesn't condemn slavery, the Quran allows slavery, how do you find people are able to hold that to be true while also thinking this is the best moral guide for all of humanity? These are godly values. This is a godly religion. How do you think people reconcile those conflicting things, conflicting values?
Well, I couldn't. I think that it's a compartmentalization. Like, we can hold two conflicting ideas in our head at the same time and not necessarily see them as conflicting, or even be willing to do the work to address it. We kind of going back to, you know, we talked about slavery, we talked about minorities, but even the second or the other half of our society, like being women, and how they have been treated over the years, and as second class humans, and as basically baby factories. In the 80s, when I was growing up in church, the women were not allowed to even be religious leaders, and it took late 90s, early 2000s for those types of things to change within a few religious sects of Christianity. But how people can do it, it's okay. If I am sitting in the pews and I am kind of giving over my critical thinking skills to a religious leader, like a pastor or a rabbi or an imam up at the front, who's kind of feeding me how I should be thinking, how I should be looking at the world, then it's way easier to not question those things and to just go about believing what they say is true. And so in some sense, and I think that there are some studies that show this, religion can turn off the critical thinking side of the brain, and we can just simply, it makes it so much easier if we can just simply follow what they're saying. And in some sense, we don't have to take that kind of responsibility on for our actions because someone in a position of higher power is sort of telling us to do this.
Definitely. So I want to go back to your story now. So from where we left off, you were. Can we go back to explaining like what exactly happened, and like what was the situation? Why was it so difficult to leave this behind? I mean, you did touch upon that, but if you can just elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that for me is that this promise of an afterlife, leaving, was the very last sort of rock of my old foundation, my old worldview, and it was gone. And so I was sort of left feeling lost and unsure how to rebuild a worldview, how to kind of defend a new worldview, because it was just brand new. It was like a baby, like a child waking up. What was interesting, though, is that leaving this idea of an afterlife behind suddenly made life vastly more valuable and vastly more precious than if life did continue afterwards, because I could die, I could get rebooted into another human body down the road, or I can get reborn into heaven, and it would all nothing would necessarily change, and it sort of diminishes the value of life here on earth. But if this is all we've got, if this is not a dress rehearsal, this is actually the real thing, then life becomes precious and priceless and incredibly valuable. And so it was interesting to see that flip, that how the whole view kind of flipped around. It was the other side of the coin that I'd never considered before. But I still was left with, what the hell do I do now? How do I see the world? How do I operate in the world? And so I have a natural tendency to be depressed. It's just something that is wiring in my brain. The religion didn't help it. Atheism didn't help it. Medicine has helped it. So, but what happened was it kind of triggered and sent me into a depression for about 4 years as I was trying to learn as much as I could and rebuild my basic foundation from scratch. So it was, the traumatic part was just feeling lost, feeling alone, and not having expected this at all. At the time, I was self-employed. My wife was self-employed. We lived in a very conservative area of Southwest Missouri. And my concern was that if folks had found out, and I think that this is very common with Islam,
ex-Muslims, yeah.
If my friends in my community found out that I was an atheist, I'd be shunned from those communities, those gatherings of people, my friends, and then lose business as well, lose our livelihood. And so I had to keep this inside. There was nobody really I knew who I could talk to about this. It was very, very frightening for me for about 4 years. And, so I devoured books, I devoured debates and podcasts to kind of build this back up. And it took, once I found a local secular community group and finding like-minded people, it was so fantastic for me to kind of be able to have these conversations in person and with other people, and finding that community was super helpful and one of the keys for me to coming out of religion.
Indeed. Did you find these people in real life, like in your community?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. It was Springfield, Missouri, and the two secular groups out there are the Springfield Skeptics and the Springfield Freethinkers. I plugged into the Springfield Skeptics like nobody's business, and they were really grateful to have me kind of step up and do more and more activities and more work with them. And it was just a fantastic feeling to find a community of like-minded people. And we can go out, we can do community service. We can go to a food pantry as atheists and just pack lunches, organize, sort food. We can go to the animal shelter as atheists. We can have Ask an Atheist events on the square and have conversations with people. I mean, it was really freeing for me to find a community of folks.
I find a lot of what you're saying so similar, and it just shows you that, like, I mean, people tend to think that a lot of the experiences that ex-Muslims have are exceptional to Islam. A lot of people think that Islam is exceptionally bad as a religion compared to other religions. And I do agree that every religion has its bad pros and cons, so to speak. But like a lot of what you're describing, you could have been an ex-Muslim. Like everything you said so far, every single thing you said, I could have had an ex-Muslim guest saying the exact same thing. Like, I was scared of losing my livelihood. In fact, I have a friend who is, I have many friends, but one of them is a photographer who is an ex-Muslim, and he doesn't tell anybody he's ex-Muslim. I have another one that is an ex-Muslim, and he's open with it, he doesn't care. But like the one of them, like all of his clients are Muslim. Not all of them, but like a lot of them. Yeah. And these are like weddings he's shooting, and so you can't like, I mean, it's in an ideal world, it doesn't matter what you believe. I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, who cares? It's a thought in your head. Like, I don't believe in God, or I believe in God. From the outside, he's as Muslim as them, because he doesn't like he's never been a very religious guy, but he definitely believed in it very strongly. And he was one of the guys that actually had a very hard time when he found out there was no God, there's no hereafter and all that. And he struggled with it. And it took him a couple of years to finally come to peace with the reality that there is no God, there's no heaven, there's no afterlife. And that whatever I do is going to be, that's just it. And like you said, it makes life in a way, once you get over it, it makes life more valuable.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah.
They think that once you become atheist, suddenly your life is meaningless. Your life is anything but meaningless, because you got this one chance to make something of it, to do something, to fulfill your dreams, or to, whether it's being a good dad, being a good parent, building a company, listening to beautiful music, or traveling, or whatever it is, or just living, just enjoying the small things in life, whether it's like drinking your favorite cup of tea. For me, it's coffee. I'm always sipping on coffee in the mornings. I love my coffee. I am probably addicted. I don't think I can ever get that. In my case, and in your case, we've found meaning in activism. So, right. We spend a time helping others and talking about these things, and that brings meaning in itself too. But a lot of these experiences are so common to everybody. You know what I'm saying?
I think you're absolutely right. That was another thing too, is that I had an identity as a spiritual thinker, and I thought a part of that was thinking that because this world was created by some higher power, that higher power therefore imbued meaning upon the world, imbued my life with a purpose. But once that higher power is removed, that idea of higher power is removed, suddenly the universe itself becomes meaningless, and that people can just stop there. Like, that's frightening. Like, well, what's the point? If the universe is meaningless, what's the point of going on and living? But on the flip side of that too means that we as humans are responsible for designing, for creating the purpose and the meaning of our life. And so that was like one of the other things that sort of hit me at that same moment, of not only how valuable and precious life was, but also I can define what my life is. I can create and even change what I want to do, what I want to put out in this world. And it was very empowering, incredibly empowering to know that I'm in charge. I can do this. I can whatever I say, if I want to make the world a better place, then that's totally up to me.
Exactly. And it doesn't always have to be like, something big.
Right.
Sometimes it's just living your life. And, like, I feel like Maslow's hierarchy, once you've taken care of your security and food and shelter, then you have energy or time to start pondering about the big things. But not everybody really cares about, or what's the purpose of life. Some people just want to live their life. They just want to have, raise a family, or maybe not raise a family. Maybe they want to become a famous actor, whatever it is. But it's different for everybody. And religion kind of trivializes that, I feel, in a sense, and makes it all into one thing. With Islam, the whole purpose of life is to worship God. Like, God created the humans and jinns. Okay, there's not just humans, jinns too, with the devils, the spirits or whatever they are, to worship him, which is very strange. But anyways, so now what you do is you reorganize your life so that whatever you do in Islam becomes that purpose. So for example, if you're an actor, well, you could act and promote Islam by making movies or something like. But again, you're always trying to do something for the religion, and that's another reason why these ideas and these religions become so overwhelming in our lives, because they're designed to do that. They're designed to piggyback off a survival mechanism, to help other people. So you don't want anyone else to go to hell, so you have to tell them as well. Now, what I want to ask you,
well, in some sense, religion seems to rob us of the ability to create meaning for our own life. It dictates it to you. You must worship this deity. You must do X, Y, and Z, and this is the purpose of your life. This is the meaning of your life. And I feel like it is much more empowering if we can take their responsibility, take that power back, and create our own meaning however we want it. So I completely agree with you. It doesn't have to be some super duper high pie in the sky. It could simply be, I want to live a life where I experience the heck out of this world. I want to travel. I want to meet people. Or I just want to I want to help people be less hungry. And so being a server at a restaurant would be perfect for that. It could be whatever you want. It doesn't have to be great. It could be small.
Exactly. You're right. Religion robs you. And that's the bigger problem I have with Islam. When people say, like, I will fight for your right to practice your religion because I believe in freedom of religion. I believe in freedom of conscience. But your religious rights end where my rights begin. So if you don't want to do something because it's not allowed in your religion, that's fine. Don't do it. But that doesn't mean you enforce that on me. Like in India, it's the whole beef thing. Muslims are, hounded for eating beef. In other countries, women are religiously obligated to cover their hair because that's the religion. And when the religion mixes with politics, it becomes a law, right? It becomes a law where it's really not a natural part of the culture. It's not like they're wearing the headscarf anyways. It was something that came about because of the religious belief. For example, if you look at Iran and you look at pictures of Iran in, I don't remember, it was the 70s or 80s, you see women in miniskirts, right? And then they had this religious revolution, and now suddenly everybody has to wear hijab, to the point where you have that lady I forget her name, Masih al-Najad. She has this White Wednesdays thing where she's promoting freedom of for women to not wear the hijab, right? Because over there you get harassed, you get abused. You can even go to, I don't know if you can go to jail. I think you can even go to jail for not covering your hair, whereas nobody sees it. I mean, for the rest of the world, Muslims don't necessarily realize that this is an arbitrary standard of modesty, because in Africa, for example, men and women go around half naked, and that doesn't cause issues. It's just that culture evolved in that way, and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Whereas over in, for example, in other countries, maybe the culture is a little bit more conservative or whatever. but there's no one size fits all, and that's what religion does. It tries to make it one size fits all, and it robs you of the freedom to decide for yourself. When you tell a little girl you have to wear hijab or you will be sinful, it may not be that you force her to do it, but like you have already taught her that if she doesn't do it, you've put this mental burden on her now, that when she grows up she has to wear hijab. If she doesn't, God's going to be angry with her, and she has to do all of these things. And same with not just women, but even men in Islam that are taught certain things. They have to pray 5 times a day, men and women both. And I have no problem with Muslims or Christians or anybody praying or meditating or having solitude. That's not the problem. The problem is when you rob people of the lives by telling them they have to do it or they will be punished. In Islam, again, I said it's very transactional. So it's not just a belief. You have to believe in God, and then you have to do all of these things as well. So if you don't do those things, you are liable to be punished for them.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Was the hijab kind of born out of the idea that women need to cover themselves, or men run the risk of being turned on and sinning against God with those bad thoughts? Is that kind of where
it's kind of like that. So the Quran. So basically, what happens is, if assuming the seerah or the life of Muhammad is accurate, we don't know for sure, but based on the Sunni understanding or the typical Muslim understanding, is that the hijab was revealed for modesty and so that men wouldn't look at women, and women, the sexuality would be only limited for the husbands, right? So when they're at home, for example, they don't need to wear hijab, but when they're out with strange men, they have to cover themselves. In some ways, like for example, the burqa is very extreme. If you look at the niqab, it's very extreme. The whole face is covered up except for the eyes. In some cultures, it's not that bad. But it all started with the story of how Muhammad's wives used to, believe it or not, Muhammad's wives used to go out to the washroom in the desert. And one of his companions, Omar, who ended up being the caliph after Abu Bakr, he complained to Muhammad and said, I see your wives and I recognize them. And this is not good. And as we know, Muhammad was a very jealous man. So after that, Allah revealed that your wives have to be covered. Men cannot talk to your wives except behind a screen. And then Muslim scholars took this and they made it for all Muslim women, not just the wives of the Prophet. So it's for the believing women. And I believe the verse in the Quran even says believing women should guard their private parts. And for the Muslim men are supposed to guard the private parts except from their spouses, and those the right hands possess. So somehow sexual slavery became a part of modesty, and like it's considered okay, and it's considered not adultery, which is again so weird, which Muslims of course have to like kind of find ways to get out of. But yeah, so basically it became, but nowadays if you want to talk about hijab nowadays has become something really different, which is why it becomes challenging to have this conversation. Hijab has become, especially for Western Muslim women, they see it as empowerment, and that's how it's being branded. It's being branded as, yeah, I'm empowered. Men don't judge me based on my attraction. You judge me based on my brain. But the reality is they've been sold this, but it's not true empowerment if it's compelled upon you. It's not truly a free choice, because you are doing this because of 7th century man that taught women that they need to do this, they need to dress. And again, it's an arbitrary standard of covering your hair. It's not just about modesty. You can be modest without covering your hair. Yep. It's in the West, I mean, I was married to a Muslim woman. She was a convert, so she converted from Pentecost before she met me, and then we got married. And I'm telling you, wearing hijab is tough. It's tougher in the West, but it's tough no matter what. You go to the beach, you cannot dress down. You have to cover your entire body in this loose fitting clothing, which is like a bag. It doesn't have to be black, but I mean, typically the community I was in, it would be usually black. So my wife, she would be wearing her clothes, her regular clothes like jeans or whatever, and then she'd be wearing this black abaya on top of that. And it's damn hot. You're going out in summer. She's sweating buckets inside, and I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm enjoying the breeze, and she's wearing all of these clothes. And she would complain about it, and she would be like, "I'm hot and sticky and uncomfortable." And I would have to tell her, like, That's just the way it is. And she saw it as a sacrifice for sure. It's not like nobody forced her to do it. I mean, I kind of did a little bit. I would be like, no, you need to do this. And I don't think she really could. Our relationship was based on Islam, right? So we put Islam first. So we did what we had to do, and it was uncomfortable, but she did it. But it's a sacrifice, and it's a sacrifice for nothing at the end of the day, because there is no Allah. Allah isn't real. And so it's yet another thing that religion imposes on you. Do you have any parallels like that for women in Christianity that you find, or even men in general, just the sacrifices that you have to make being a Christian? Is it as bad as what I described?
No, not in mainstream Christianity. There's obviously some sects of Judaism, like the Hasidic Jews, and then versions of Christianity, like the Mennonites and Amish, where their dress code is very rigorous. But for mainstream, obviously there's some shaming for folks who want to wear scantily or skimpy clothes. Some women who want to wear skimpy clothes, but it's just kind of a look down upon, and not necessarily much else. Not much else.
That's good to hear. And I personally think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have secularism here. And the religious theocracy cannot compel these things to the same. And Christianity is an older religion, so it's had a lot longer to be modernized, to be to get in, mixed with liberal values and the Enlightenment values that we have today. And from that perspective, Islam is much worse, because even in the Muslim community here, like there was 2 Muslim women. One of them was an influencer, and she had his hijab clothing, like modest hijab clothing and all that. And she took off her hijab and she made a video that was 3.5 hours long. That was just abuse, like basically Muslim men and women talking about, just insulting her one after another because she had taken off the hijab, like she, what I mean? So and I made a video reaction to that. Her name is Dina Tokyo. So Dina Tokyo is still a Muslim woman. She's not ex-Muslim, but she decided at some point to take off the hijab, and she was known for her hijab fashion and all that on Instagram, and she had millions of subscribers and all that, followers. And the lashback she got, even though she was in the West, I think she's in the UK. I mean, people were making an example out of her, and she's like an extreme example because she's an influencer. But the same thing happens in people's lives to smaller extents when they want to take off the hijab. Muslim women, even in the West, it's very difficult to take off a hijab. It's not at all an easy decision to make. Once you put on this thing, you will be forever judged if you take it off. I mean, if you don't wear it, it's easier that you just keep it off. But if you start, and even some women who started wearing it when they were younger, and now they're kind of limited. I feel bad. There's another hijabi, I forget her name now, but she makes these like skits, these skits, and it's so funny. In one of her skits, her hair is showing, but guess what? It wasn't her hair. She's wearing a wig and she's wearing a hijab under it. So and then she had to explain in the comments, guys and girls, I'm not showing my hair. I have a hijab on. And I'm like, you poor thing, what you have to go through to not face the wrath of the community. The community will slaughter you if you're hijabi and you're popular, because it becomes like, oh, you did this in order to take advantage of Muslims to get a support, and now you're just taking off. But like, you don't need to wear hijab to get the support of, like, you shouldn't have to wear a hijab to be supported. Like, it's just sad, And
it goes back to our conversation earlier about how they're using their religious beliefs to force others and shame others and coerce others into doing something that they don't want to necessarily do.
Exactly. And it could be like, I guess the justification that people give is that religion, God knows best. And so some of these things, when my wife used to ask me, because she converted after me, and like I explained to you before we had the conversation, I converted from one sect to another. I went from a very liberal Shia sect to mainstream Orthodox. And when my wife would ask me, like, why does God say this and that? And a lot of the times the answer was just God knows best, and we just have to believe in it and accept it, because we don't know for sure the reasoning behind all of it. And eventually we'll come to know that, this was the best decision. When I left Islam, obviously I just threw all that away, because I'm like, well, now I can see it doesn't make sense. It never made sense, but I had to kind of hold that in bay. I had to stop my questioning, because I had to just believe that God knew better. But then when I like, for example, the LGBT thing, I was always like, I don't really get that, because I never believed that gay people were choosing to be gay. However they ended up gay, whether it was the genes or the upbringing or the experiences in life or whatever the case was, whatever caused them to have the sexuality that they have, it wasn't a choice. It's not a choice. I mean, there's examples of twins, which is bizarre, that the twins, yet one of them's gay and one's not gay. Yet I remember reading an interview with this one guy where he said, for as long as he knew, since he knew his brother, he always knew he was gay. Since he was a kid, he knew that. He could tell. And yet it's his brother, and he never chose to be gay. He just somehow, for whatever reason, ended up that way. So when religion sort of makes this like a moral issue, it shows you how badly it misunderstands human nature, psychology, and obviously evolution is a big part of the mystery of how we are the way we are, which like basically we only found out 150 years ago, and it's been so insightful like nothing else has been, as to why we are the way we are. Natural selection is such a powerful concept. It's such a powerful meta concept. Like, you want to say something?
I like how you were saying, it sounds like from the Muslim culture, the phrase to shut down inquiry is God knows best. In the Christian side, there's the phrase, you just got to have faith, which is just as the same exact thing. When you start to push up against those areas where there are no good answers, you experience, well, God knows best. Christians experience, you just got to have faith. And it's a curiosity killer. It stops the conversation dead. And encourages no further inquiry at all. And it drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. It's a lazy way to say, I don't want to play anymore. I don't have the answers for you. And this is getting dangerous.
Do you, if you're comfortable to talk about it, how did it affect your relationship with your wife? Did it, what happened there?
My wife is freaking amazing. She has been such a support. She wasn't necessarily raised in the same religion at all. She was more raised in a kind of a pagan type of religion, but she always has had just this very great head on her shoulders, where she didn't take things at face value. Where for me, I took things as a kid, like I was spoon-fed religion, and I'm like, gobbled it up. Let's do this. So she can't fully understand where I came from and also what I went through, but she can totally see that it was painful and life-changing, and she supported me 100% from it. I really enjoy talking about these kinds of things. I enjoy the debates. I enjoy the conversation. For her, she has no interest in it, but she is still super supportive of me. So I don't know if it made our relationship better or worse, but on my end, I couldn't have had a better partner to help me through this.
Wonderful. And
lucky in that
you're lucky in that regard. Have you heard of Christians that have trouble when they leave the religion behind?
Oh my God, yeah, it's it happens all the time, especially in some of the spin-off religions like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. people come to recovering from religion who are so afraid to come out to their parents. And when they do, sometimes they are kicked out of the house. They are shunned from their family. They're shunned from their friends and their community. And it happens way more than I'd like it to happen. And it's surprisingly how often it happens. So yeah, it is tough for folks to come out as a non-believer. And something that I've always encouraged people is like, look, you don't have to come out there. If it is not safe for you, if your livelihood, if you're dependent on a family member to give you housing and give you food, don't come out. Stay safe. Find a community that you can talk with, but stay safe, because we don't need martyrs. In religion.
We don't need atheist martyrs.
No, we don't need. There's very few of them, if any.
Well, no, was quite a lot when it comes to ex-Muslims in the Middle East.
Yeah,
right? Like for example, in Saudi Arabia, what's his name? He's being lashed right now for talking about secularism. There's been a whole bunch of Bangladeshi bloggers that were executed for talking about Islam.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of I don't want any more murders, and I have the exact same advice you have, where I tell people, especially and it's a whole other level of magnitude when it comes to ex-Muslims in the Middle East. I'm like, just don't come out, just don't say anything, just don't tell anyone, just keep it to yourself. In the West, I'm like exactly what you said. I'm like, if you're living on your own, that's much better. You have to play it by ear. You have to look and see what the situation is with your life. Badawi is what I was talking about. So you have to see if the relationship you have with your parents, are they likely to kick you out or anything like that. So in that situation, in that case, it could be different. Yeah, but we don't want any more murders. We want people to keep to keep their lives, because those of us that can do the work will continue doing it, and those of you who can't, don't do it. Let us do the heavy burden. Let us do the heavy lifting.
And it goes back to this is all we have. This is our only life that we've got. We don't. There's nothing after us after this, and so if we die, it's not like we're going to come back to life in heaven or get reincarnated or something.
Exactly. And so I wanted to, so that's just amazing. That's just really awesome that you had that experience. So now, before we get to talk to a little bit more about recovering from religion, the type of work you do, and ex-Muslims that you've talked to, because you told me you talked to some ex-Muslims as well. So I want to hear about that. Before we go any further, I just want to do a little plug for my show. Those of you who are supporting me, John Stopman, Solitary Emmy, and all of you who have donated one-time donations, all of you who continue to support the channel, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I love all of you guys. Thank you so much. Those of you who are new here, please do consider joining. Click join now below and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Thank you for that. Now, going back to recovering from religion, the work you do, you did talk about it a little bit, but can you tell me, why are you so motivated to do this? Why do you want to help others who struggle? Big part of your life, you said, was you struggled yourself. Yeah. You left religion behind. Is that why? Like, is that what it is?
That's exactly, yeah. The pain and hurt that I experienced, the depression that I went through, I don't want people to go through that. And so when I was approached by a good friend of mine to kind of start up Recovering from Religion support group in Springfield, so the two of us co-hosted it, I'm like, this is a great opportunity to do just that, to help people not feel alone, to help people to get through some of this hurt and pain. And that's exactly what happened. We have had so many people come through the chat and come through the support groups who come to us feeling alone, feeling scared, feeling confused, and we are there as a empathetic ear, as folks to provide resources, and just to assure them that they're not alone and what they're feeling is okay and it's normal.
Indeed. I do want to continue on this topic, but I do have a question that I think is that I'd love to address. Eric Wells said, "This is the one life we got. There's nothing after it." How does he know that? Has Eric Wells died, experienced the nothing less in the afterlife, and has he come back to let us know? How would you answer that?
I am not 100% sure that we do not have an afterlife. In fact, I'm not 100% sure about anything. My position is to kind of take the default as in it doesn't exist, and waiting but I will happily change my mind if extraordinary evidence does surface that we have an afterlife. So by saying I'm taking the default like an afterlife doesn't exist, it's the same thing as like if someone were to come to me and tell me, hey, there are pink elephants alive on Saturn's moon Titan,
Russell's teapot, basically, right?
What's that? Yeah, Russell's teapot.
Yeah,
it's exactly right. It's an extraordinary claim, and I'm not really going to believe it until I have proof that it exists. So the same thing about Russell's teapot.
Yeah, that's what we call the burden of proof. So people that are not familiar with this, I'll just quickly explain it. The idea is that we understand, we have a basic idea how the world works. We know that like monkeys don't fly or whatever. If someone comes to you and says, well, monkeys fly, the burden is on them to prove it. They can't say, no, you prove to me monkeys don't fly, brother. And you'll be like, what are you saying? And they'll be like, yeah, see, you can't prove that monkeys don't fly, right? Absence of evidence is not evidence of whatever that expression is, right? So that's not how the world works. That's not how we have conversation. That's not how philosophy works. We go based on, evidence, on the normal state of things, how things work. So now if someone comes and says to you, whatever they say, now before I explain that, I do want to ask you one thing. When you say you don't know anything, are you 100% confident that Jesus is not the Son of God? Or are you not sure about that either?
I reserve the right to change my mind if evidence came to me saying that Jesus was the Son of God, like extraordinary. It would happen.
Let's say like right now, without the evidence, are you 100% sure Jesus is not the Son of God?
I would say I'm 99.99% sure.
Okay, so I would say I'm 100% sure that Jesus is not the Son of God. That like Vishnu, Brahman, whatever, like Shiva, Krishna, none of those ever existed. They're not gods. Krishna didn't steal the what was it? The cow's fat from the beautiful girls in the garden. Muhammad never flew to heaven on a winged horse or Burak, whatever it is. None of those things are true. Islam is not true. There is no such thing as Allah. There's no creator. Now, if you ask me about a general deity God or creator God or something like that, I'll be agnostic and I'll be 100% agnostic and I'll say exactly what you said. But when it comes to the truth claims that Islam comes with or Christianity, then I'm willing to say I'm 100% sure that this particular God with this particular characteristics for sure is not true because it's self-contradicting.
Yes. The way that the narratives are described in the holy books, no way could they be true.
Exactly.
Like you said, they're totally contradictory.
Exactly, because they contradict themselves from beginning to end. And I would actually, like, I used to say the same thing you said about the extraordinary evidence, but I heard someone say this. I think it was Hemant Mehta. I don't remember who it was exactly. Hopefully it was actually him. Whoever it was. Yes, it was him, actually. He said, we don't even need extraordinary evidence. We just need, like, regular evidence. Just give us, like, a little bit. Like, just give a little thing that shows.
One of the things to consider, too, is what if we get some evidence? How could we possibly tell if it's a difference between maybe a supernatural being or an incredibly advanced alien race?
That is a big problem. When you really start thinking about it, it becomes like really impossible to know, right? Because at the end of the day, and one of my cousins asked me this, and now he's ex-Muslim like me, but I was a religious one, and he asked me a question which I thought was kind of dumb. He's like, well, how do you know Allah is not an alien and the actual actual Allah, meaning the actual creator, he has an Allah too. How do you know Allah doesn't have an Allah? Basically, right? I'm like, I was really like scratching my head trying to solve that. I'm like, how would I know? I wouldn't. I'm like, no, you can't. You just have to assume that Allah is Allah and he's
that's the assumption there.
Right? And you can't go any further than that. So everything that we have, and this is a problem too with sending holy books and prophets. It's completely indistinguishable from a lie. The method itself is so flawed that there's no way to know whether this person's a liar or telling the truth. And people ask, okay, well, what would convince you? Well, what would convince me is not what we have today. It's something better than what we have today would convince me. For example, with the Quran, if God would have sent his final revelation at the same time to 7 different continents, instead of sending it in 7 dialects of Arabic, which is a claim now, because the Quran has conflicting sort of versions, let's call them. Like, they're not major variants, but they're variants. They are variants of the Quran, and most Muslims don't know this. Now it's exploded on Twitter and everywhere because one of the big scholars, Yasir Qadhi, admitted this in an interview that there's problems with the preservation of the Quran. So he shook the boat so badly that everybody's talking about it now. But there is variants, and most Muslims before this didn't know this. So how do you deal with the variants? Well, there's a hadith saying of Muhammad that said that Allah actually revealed the Quran in 7 versions, but there's more than 7 variants, so that's a problem. So now you have a Muslim claim that Quran was revealed in 7 variants. Why didn't he reveal it in 7 languages?
Right.
Why 7 variants of Qurayshi Arabic that like now it just causes problems for everybody? Why not send it in Chinese, in Latin, in Greek, in Arabic? And the same thing. At least if you have something like that, we wouldn't be able to explain it. I think what we have now is completely explainable as human error in preservation. Like what we have looks exactly like there's mistakes in preservation. There's scribal errors. There's memory error. Like that's what it looks like, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what would have been truly amazing is if there had perhaps been an extra book in the Quran or an extra book in the Bible, which was purely ones and zeros. And nobody knew for 2,000 years what the heck this book said until we developed computers. We used the same binary code with ASCII language in it, and we could then translate this damn book 2,000 years later. That would be pretty damn impressive. Or if Jesus, when he was hanging on the cross, wanted to save billions of lives, he could have said something like, wash your hands with soap, put your outhouse 6 meters away or 60 meters away from where you live or something like that. Don't eat where you crap. If he could have done something like that, like indicated that he knew what germ theory was, that would have been truly amazing. That would have been completely ahead of his time. And
but aren't you belittling religion? Because religion is all about giving meaning and purpose. It's not about germs and science and all of that crap. Like, who cares about washing your hands anyways? Like, I mean, what's more important is Jesus died for your sins. Like, that's what's important. Or Allah sent Muhammad as a final messenger.
It would have saved so many lives, though. Washing your hands with soap would have saved so many more lives. I would say it would also have improved the quality of life of so many innocent people that died. Now, according to theism, all those people who died, if they're in the right religion, they'd go to heaven anyway, so it doesn't matter. They suffered and they got, diarrhea. They died from diarrhea, which obviously is such a silly thing to die for nowadays. I shouldn't say silly. I feel like I'm belittling it. What I mean is, it's such a trivial problem to solve. Yeah. Right, with antibiotics now. But when you look at it from the perspective of not a presuppositionalist, but someone that is looking at this to determine whether this is truly from God, these points are very good points because they show that the Bible and the Quran, they contain only the knowledge of the people at that time. Like when you say germ theory, even if it wouldn't have saved lives, it would have been something puzzling for us to figure out, like, if people didn't know about this, like, so where did this come from? And that's exactly what you find with the Quran too. You find it contains exactly the understanding of the people of the time. And apologists will have to kind of say, well, at the beginning, apologists were saying, well, no, the Quran is a miracle. They even went so far to say that it had knowledge that nobody else had.
that narrative has been so badly ripped apart by atheists that, and even Christians too, frankly, but Christians don't tend to pick on that type of argument because it also applies equally to their book. So the Christians tend to attack Muhammad's morality because they can do that and they can claim Christianity to be true. But when they pick on the scientific errors in the Quran, it's a double-edged sword. Like, you're cutting yourself at the same time as you're cutting the Quran, you're cutting the Bible too, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's the same,
you have to
right?
use that same method to look at your own holy scriptures if you're going to do that on others.
And the thing is, the Quran, and I'm pretty sure the Bible, none of them say thinking occurs in the brain. They always talk about the heart, right? I mean, that's also startling. The Quran doesn't mention the female egg. It's always about the male sperm, and nobody knew there was a female egg. I mean, it's so obvious now. Like, we understand menstruation. We understand the whole thing. At that time, it became like a religious impurity.
Right.
Why is that religious impurity? That doesn't even make sense. Like, that's just a natural part of that. That's like a special type of blood that's made for feeding a baby. That should be holy. Like, never mind, like, impure. That should be like, that's lifeblood, like literally lifeblood. You know what I'm saying? That would feed the babies, and you came from that, and yet that's impure. In Islam, women that are bleeding, they don't pray, they don't fast. They have to make up their fast at another time. In Judaism, you don't even sleep with the woman, your wife, if she's bleeding. She's in a separate bed altogether, which is next level. Like, Islam is a little bit more reasonable on that. At least you can still sleep with her. Some cultures, she's not even allowed in the house. She's out in a different house altogether because she's bleeding. I mean, it just shows you, like, human beings, we were so, like, we were just like in the dark, man. Like, we had no idea what's going on. We were just like struggling, and
we were guessing, trying to do the best we could with the information that we had back then, and we're still doing that today. But we've developed processes that can help reinforce or just totally deny the suppositions that we're making these days. The process we have now are much, much, much better than we ever had back when the Bible and the Quran were written. Being able to, I'm getting lost on what the word is, but anyways, I'll think about it.
I want to address this this comment here that both are beliefs, but evolutionists claim theirs is not belief but science. So I sometimes when I hear things like this, I feel like people fundamentally misunderstood what science is. Science is not dogma. When you say, I believe Jesus died for my sins, that he was raised from the dead on the third day, that 100 people saw him or whatever, that is a belief. That is an unfalsifiable belief. Not just a belief, it's unfalsifiable. You can never prove it to be true. It's a belief. That's what faith means by definition. Yeah. Nobody claims that evolution is a belief, that you have to believe in it, that it's a fundamental dogma. No, it's up for criticism, and it's always been up for criticism from the day that Darwin so eloquently and so profoundly described it from what he observed. He saw it happening on the islands, the Galapagos Islands, where he saw the different turtles with the different shells. And he's like, did God create a different turtle with a different shell on each one of the islands? One of them had a spiky shell. One of them had and the birds with a different. So of course not. He observed it. And then once he came up with this, he had some questions of his own. He's like, I don't understand how the eye could have evolved, because I don't understand how you can have half an eye. It's either you have an eye or you don't have an eye. For another thing he was wondering, I think he was wondering, or people have wondered, was about the wings. How can you have a half wing? But in the 150 years since he developed that theory until today, we have found examples of eye evolution at every single stage, from like basic like light detection from very like fish, for example, to like eagles. So basically we've seen the eye evolution. There's examples of eye evolution in every animal on earth, like at different stages of it, and we are at a certain stage. When it comes to for example, the wings, we like just look at flying squirrels. They don't actually fly, they glide. they have a flap of skin between the arm and the body that's basically almost a wing, and in some cases it became a wing. It just makes so much sense. It just all fits in so beautifully.
And it's super easy to knock evolution. Just one single piece of evidence. Find a rabbit in the Cambrian.
Yes.
Find a rabbit in the Cambrian. Find humans in the Cretaceous. And
what is Cambrian and Cretaceous? Can you?
What's that?
What are these terms, these periods you're referring to? Cambrian.
The Cambrian is about 300 million years ago. It was mostly ocean life. There was trilobites swimming around and scurrying around on the ground. Very it was complex life, but it was nothing like we see today. And mammals hadn't evolved yet because it was like hundreds of millions of years ago. And so if you could find a mammal, a rabbit, that evolution would say wouldn't have had time to evolve. If you could find those type of animals in the Cambrian, that's going to have to let us, we're going to have to re-examine the entire theory of evolution. Just one bit of evidence will make the whole thing fall. In the Cretaceous, where dinosaurs were the king, were ruling the land, humans hadn't evolved yet. There were mammals, but there were definitely no humans. We've only been around 2 million years or so.
So I have this. I couldn't find the original anymore because it seems to have gone down. But there's this beautiful visual that shows you like the order of when we find, like, so basically when you dig into the soil, as you go further down, there's very specific things that we found at specific stages, and it's simple logic that as you go further down, it's older soil. So as you were implying, you never find, for example, a fish appearing before flowering plants. You never find, for example, like a mammal appearing before fish. It's in a very specific order in the dirt. So if you guys want to disprove evolution, by all means, you just have to find an example of, and like, you just have to find an example of life out of order, not in the order that we found it. And if you did, well done. You've disproved evolution. It's not unfalsifiable. It's a falsifiable claim. You can prove it wrong. You can actually prove it wrong. Yeah. It's not a matter of dogma. So it's not.
I had said that the Cambrian was 300 million years ago. From the diagram I saw that I was wrong. It was 580 or 500 million years, half a billion years ago. So it's even further back than I had said.
So let's talk about the ex-Muslims that you've talked to, and maybe if you want as well, just the Christians, and the type of challenges they have, and how your organization helps them to deal with those struggles. You mentioned that there's some people even calling you from the Middle East, from like Saudi and stuff like that.
Yeah. So recovering from religion, we our mission is to provide hope, healing, and support for those who are doubting their religion or transitioning out of the religion. We are not in the business of deconverting folks at all, and we're not in the business of even giving advice. We're just here as a resource and as an empathetic ear, because most of the time, people who are doubting their beliefs don't have the freedom or the community to raise these kinds of questions, unless they'll be told, well, God has a plan, or God knows best, or you just have to have faith. So when people come to us, they're oftentimes scared, they're oftentimes angry, they're oftentimes hurting, and we can provide the hope, healing, and support through several different programs. The first one is really the helpline community. Folks can go to the recoveringfromreligion.org website and chat online from anywhere in the world. And we also have hotlines around the world too that folks can call in and have a voice-to-voice conversation. Everybody who is on the helpline are volunteers, and they're trained to not give any specifics, but about themselves, but just to focus on what the people who are coming to them are concerned about. Another program, the program which I am the director of, is the support groups. And these, as opposed to the online chat or over the phone, these are in-person meetings. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, but without the higher power, without the 12 steps. Yeah, you can see our hotline numbers over there too. And here are all of the support groups that we have around the world, 46 of them in total right now. And we're always looking to get more support groups. We just need to have volunteers who step up to be the leaders in those areas. These support groups are in-person meetings. They're face-to-face meetings where they're hosted by a volunteer group leader, and we have a safe space where there's no proselytizing or harassing or attempts to deconvert, but it's a safe space where people can raise their questions, address their doubts, bring up some past trauma and past issues. I like what you said about at the very beginning about how religion gets its roots into us, and I feel like for me, I've compared my religious upbringing, my life, almost to like a garden, and I have to continually be weeding it and making it what I want. And every now and then, these little weeds of some past religious thinking or past religious issues come up, and I have to deal with it. And so I love the roots analogy. But so with those various programs, people can come to us from all over the world. And you asked specifically about conversations with Muslims or even ex-Muslims in some some countries that don't treat non-Muslims very well at all, like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. The helpline has people coming, ex-Muslims and Muslims coming to them all of the time. And the conversations we have are really not much different than what we have with any other religions that come to us. There's the same amount of fear, the same amount of hurt, the same amount of doubt and concern that any other folks in any other religion have. The additional part, though, is in these countries, there's a massive safety concern. All we can really do is point them to some resources, point to some other forums, help them to find a community where they can safely have these conversations safely, and find other people that have the same mindset. We encourage the folks who do come to us from countries like Pakistan, Iran, or Saudi Arabia to set up a VPN in order to safely speak with us, because we don't really want to get them in trouble if their country happens to pick up on the conversation. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest difference that we work with folks who are doubting in like Bangladesh or like I said, Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, is we ask them to set up a VPN to encrypt the conversation and have it as private as possible and as safe as possible. That is, we want to really keep the folks feeling safe that come to us. We're not in the business to deconvert, or especially not in the business to out them or even encourage them to out themselves. We're just here to offer hope and healing and support.
And what do you like? What type of questions do they ask you?
The ones that I've experienced, they want to find a way out of the country. How do I get out of this situation? How do I get out of this country? What can we? What can I do? And on our Recovering from Religion website, we have religion-specific resources for Jehovah's Witness, for Mormons, for Muslims, Seventh-day Adventists. I think there are resources that we're able to direct them to and share with them in those specific cases.
Okay. And so like you were saying, it's the what you find unique with ex-Muslims is the whole safety issue. What about ex-Muslims in the West? Do you get any of them contact you, like in America, Canada, anything like any?
Yeah, yeah, we do, and because it's more safe. Like their lives aren't necessarily at as much of a risk in the West as it is in the Middle East. We can handle and work with them just like we would with any other Western religion. It doesn't have to be nearly as private, but the conversations are still, or it doesn't have to be nearly as secure, but the conversations are still very, very similar.
What are the demographics of people that call you? Is it women, men, young, old,
It's
all over the place?
all over the place. Yeah. Yeah. There are folks that are coming out and seeing this, their religion or having their doubts about religion in their teens. We have folks in their 80s that are coming to us and questioning their religion too. It is not age specific. It's not gender specific. It's not even religion specific. It's people starting to think for themselves.
So when you have these support groups, did you say these people are trained, or this is like more informal?
They so there is a difference between professional mental health and peer support. We are all in the helpline community and in the support groups. We are peer support. None of us are professionally trained, and so we don't give advice, and we don't ever claim that we are going to be able to solve the problems for them. So we're trained to listen empathetically, and we're trained to provide some reflective listening back at them. More often than not, people just need to talk. People just need to get out the things that have been bugging them, that have been rattling and bouncing around their head. And we have people that come back to the support groups or come back to the chat line or the phone calls time and time again as they process the conversations. It's not immediate. It's a very long process, or it's a process, time independent. It's a process. So folks come back to us time and time again as they reach a different point in their journey.
Mm-hmm. And you know what you said about wanting to talk, I do get people actually contact me because they want to talk, and unfortunately, like, I don't have time to talk to everybody to the level that they need to. So I'm so glad that I actually have someone I can send them now, and I can say, well, the support groups, for people from ex-Muslims that are in North America, I always recommend they check out Ex-Muslims of North America, because it's almost like it's a parallel group to what your group is. And, you know, Ex-Muslims of North America provides advocacy, informal peer support. We don't have a helpline just yet, maybe one day, but it covers some of the same stuff, and obviously it's very specific to like ex-Muslims. But like, from a conversation I can see, and I think people should realize that you don't necessarily need to talk to another ex-Muslim. You can talk to anyone else that knows how to listen to you and can talk to you. And if you just want to talk, this is a great resource. So this is why I actually wanted to talk to you in the first place. I wanted to talk to you because I wanted more people to know about your organization and the services you offer. You mentioned that, you know, you have these Zoom calls every Monday.
Yeah, every Monday night. We have we started it back in April, and we have what we're calling RFRX. It's like a prescription for recovering from religion. But there are a lot of similar topics that come up on the hotline, on the chat line, or in the phone calls, or in the support groups. There are very specific topics, very specific things that folks are struggling with, like, where do morals come from now? What's the meaning of life? Like, now that I'm no longer a believer, or I'm coming out of my religion, I'm realizing that there's this thing called autonomy that I now have. And I think that you spoke with Marie Delafont a little bit ago. Yeah, she's fantastic with teaching about autonomy. And so there are these individual topics that what we are doing is we're taking one of those topics every Monday night, and we bring on an expert, and it's a discussion for about an hour between the hosts and the guest or the guests. We talk about it for about an hour. Then we have a Q&A session where folks who are in on the Zoom call during the discussion can ask questions in the chat, and we'll present those during the Q&A session. And then after that, we get to hear from our executive director, Gail Jordan, or we get to hear from the founder and president, Dr. Daryl Ray, give a little bit of a closing message. Then we shut the recording off. This whole time, everyone is, all of the guests are anonymous. No one can really,
okay.
the guests or anything like that. Just the hosts are visible, and the hosts are visible, the guests are visible, the participants in the Zoom call,
Okay.
They're anonymous, right?
Do you get trolls ever, or do you get people that come and they want to argue about these things, or are these all like people that are actually ex-theists now and they want support and they want to learn?
What's interesting is we don't get very many trolls at all, but if we do, just like in the support groups, we handle it immediately. We want this to be a very safe space for folks.
Oh yeah. I mean, and like I said, this is great. Like, obviously on my channel, when I do have these type of conversations as well, but it's not at all a safe space. There's a lot of like arguing in the conversation. I remember one of the live streams, people were arguing about airplanes, and I was like, what are you guys talking about? It's so funny. I want to end off on this question. I think this is an interesting question. Why, Eric, why are you an evangelist for doubt and unbelief?
An evangelist?
I feel like I'm an evangelist for doubt and unbelief. I don't know. Do you not describe yourself in that sense? You're not an evangelist. You're more like, how would you describe yourself?
I think that if you can define an evangelist as someone who is excited and on board with a mission, then sure, I can be an evangelist for recovering from religion.
Yeah.
And it's exactly kind of why we went through my story a little bit. Is I went through pain and suffering and trauma coming out of religion, and the purpose that I've created for my life is to leave this world a better place than I found it. And so if I can do that through working with people, empathizing with people, listening to people, providing resources for people who are also struggling, also have some trauma, pain, and doubt, then I'm leaving this world a better place. I'm accomplishing the mission that I've set out for my life. So there.
Beautiful. I mean, you said it. I mean, this whole conversation has been a discussion about you and why you do this. But for me, I get this question all the time. Usually it's not like this. Usually it's from Muslims who say, well, just go live your life. I am living my life. This is what I want to do. Like, this is what turns me on. I love talking about this. And even as a Muslim, I love talking about theology. I was, motivated. These discussions are interesting, much more interesting than my 9-to-5 job, which is, software development. So I'm a software developer. I like software development, but I like this stuff even more. Even when I did university, I was always taking soft classes like anthropology and psychology, and I was a Muslim at the time. And I actually almost did a minor in psychology because I loved it so much. So these topics are very interesting and I think very helpful. And I do think that having these conversations is beneficial to society. From my own small little YouTube channel, I feel like I'm having an impact. And to me, that matters. I feel like having these conversations is helping people. All the time I get thank yous from people saying, your channel helped me, and
Yes.
and that's just amazing. I'm happy to do that. And by partnering with, for example, Recovering from Religion, ex-Muslims in North America, I feel like we are making the world a better place. When people lose their faith, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's just not possible. You find people that go back to religion, they never go back in the same way. They're no longer fundamentalists. They're more into like a reformed, wishy-washy version of the religion where they're willing to pick and choose, they're willing to cherry pick, or they'll say it's not literal. Like I know one guy that he's like, I don't believe Adam and Eve was a literal story, even though he's like, I'm Muslim, I believe in the world message, and I believe Muhammad was a good man, but I don't believe Adam and Eve because he knows the stories are made up. So, yeah. But he's Muslim still. And there's this other guy I talked to, his name is Mufassal Islam. He was the biggest opponent of Islam, and now he's a Muslim again. But when I talked to him, his Islam is totally different. He's like, I don't believe in killing apostates. I don't believe that homosexuality is necessarily a bad thing. And he tries to reinterpret the Quran in a different way. So frankly speaking, once a genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. And so you have to deal with it. And it becomes a problem for some people. And this is why we're here having these conversations, because I believe that having conversations is the way to get to the truth and is the way to make the world a better place. Even if I'm wrong in some of the things I say, I feel like through the conversation itself, that becomes apparent and we expose the truth, and the truth will be out there, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. Recovering from religion and kind of the stuff that I do with them, we're not hosting debates. We're not doing activism, like showing up at the state capitol or the national capitol or anything like that. We're not doing community events where we're feeding the homeless or anything like that. We're solely focused on support and helping people who are sitting on the fence. We don't get folks coming to us who are diehard evangelical, diehard Muslims, diehard Hindus. We're not getting those types of people because that's not our purpose. We don't really even engage with those types of people. We don't even show up in those types of forums. So we work with the fence sitters. We work with the people who are hurting. We work with the people who have doubts. And like you said, if we weren't getting folks coming back and saying, you have no idea how much this conversation that you had with me meant. You have no idea how much the work you guys are doing did for me, and how much better I am and I feel as a person. Even if they go back to the religion, like what you were saying, they are changed. They are better because of it. And if we weren't getting that type of feedback, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. We wouldn't feel and even think that what we were doing was necessary. But every month there are over 500 chats and phone calls that come into RFR. Every month we work with hundreds of people in all of the support group meetings. These people are continuing to show up, and new ones time and time again. And so what you're doing, what we're doing is changing people's lives, making the world a better place, and alleviating a little bit of the pain and suffering that's in the world.
And honestly, that is just amazing. And what you're doing is going to become even more important because, as some of us have noticed, there's a bit of there is a tsunami happening, and it hasn't quite reached the tipping point yet, but more and more people every day are questioning, are leaving, and are confused about religion. So the work you are doing, even though it's not as, dramatic and exciting as, what I'm doing or some other people are like Matt Dillahunty debating on TV and whatever, it's so vital. You guys are the hidden ones behind the scenes, and you are the public face, but you represent so many people behind the scenes that are not coming on camera. Maybe they're not as comfortable to have these conversations, but these support workers are so vital and so necessary and so important, because we don't want people to leave religion and then want to be suicidal or depressed or, to kind of lose their lives. We don't want that. That's not the goal. The goal is never to, the goal is to make people's lives better. And my life was better when I left religion. Your life has got better. And so we are doing what we can to improve the world, to make it a better place. Do you have any final comments you want to leave people with before we end this conversation? I want to say thank you so much for having this. It was great having you on. I'm so glad I managed to get a hold of you. And is there any final things you want to add? And
yeah, guys, support what Abdullah's doing. This is vitally important. And I'm so grateful that you're here and watching and being a part of the work that he does. Please support what he does. Recovering from religion works 100% off of volunteers. You kind of heard my story, and I feel so much better because I volunteered for RFR. I feel better about myself, about the impact I'm making on the world. And I also feel like I'm undoing a little bit of the damage that I did when I was a believer as well. We could always use volunteers, folks who can work behind the scenes, taking chats in the chat line, folks who are working behind the scenes, taking the phone calls, folks who have stepped up in their local area to create a support group. We have 46 across the world, but we could always use some more. If there is not a support group in your area and you feel like you can step up and lead one, then you'll be working with me. You'll be working with our team to make sure that you get the right training and ready to go. So if you feel like you want to contribute and kind of help a little bit like Abdullah's doing, then come volunteer for Recovery from Religion. Get your feet wet doing that. That's what I've got. Thank you so much for letting me come on here and talk with you about this. I had a great time.
It was fun. I mean, we are an international brotherhood of and sisterhood of atheists. We have a lot, just like, I mean, atheists don't have, we have a unbelief in common, but we're such a diverse group of people. We all have different political beliefs. We don't tend to be as united on these things as theists because it comes along with the religious beliefs that they have to kind of swallow. But we are a diverse group of people, but we've had such similar experiences that bond us, and so despite the fact that I'm a brown guy in Canada that left Islam and you're a white guy in America that left Christianity, we still have so much in common, which is amazing. And I know if you were here, I would love to go out for a beer with you. I can drink beer now. Yes, yes. But like, shoot the shit, whatever. I would love to meet you one day. Hopefully one day I'll come to America and maybe at one of these conferences, Faith to Faithless or something. And I'd be happy to meet you, and thank you for all the work you've been doing. And guys and gals, please do consider helping at Recovering from Religion. If you don't necessarily have to come on camera, but you can do a lot behind the scenes to help people who are struggling with this. All of us are united, I think, on some common things here, and a lot of us have gone through similar experiences. So you can help other people who are still dealing with this. Those of us who are kind of in front of the camera, we don't always have time to deal with so many people. So I'm so thankful for this. And yeah, thanks for coming on, Eric. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great. I love this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And stay tuned. Tomorrow we have another live stream coming. It's been rescheduled from today with Abdullah Gondal, the Two Abdullah show. It's going to be tomorrow. So we'll see you, the rest of you, tomorrow. Bye, everyone.